impacts lives. Our ingenuity flows through every drop of the billion liters of paint and coatings we produce every year, adding color to all the industries we supply through strong distribution and in turn enriched the lives of millions around the world. We continue to set new standards in coatings for motor vehicles. Our protective coatings sustain and enhance the performance of bridges, ships, fuel pipes, and chemical tanks. By offering developers and architects a variety of highly durable and weather-resistant options, we make it possible to realize their ambitions. And for our consumers, we strive to deliver the best end-to-end solutions, including design services to perfectly complement our products. We are Nippon Paint. We harness the brilliance of innovation. We inspire the lives of millions now and for decades to come.
The world is truly extraordinary, filled with amazing wonders of nature and breathtaking sceneries in which every human being is unique in their own special way. We are all different in genders, ages, and identities, from diverse family backgrounds, regions, ethnicities, and cultures. We do have one thing in common: ideas. From the things we have seen, the experiences we have gained, and our exposure to the world, we generate infinite ideas to contribute to our society's social, economic, and cultural values, to help build and enhance the world we live in. The world needs change now more than ever, and a push for revolutionary innovation which will thrust us towards improving the quality of our lives. AYDA is determined to positively build a community of enthusiastic, outstanding, and compassionate spatial designers. We believe we can provide more to the world through our efforts. Founded in 2008, AYDA aims to help nurture the talents of tomorrow, together with leading architects and interior designers of our generation. Over the years, AYDA has evolved to become an international community in 16 countries and regions, and expanding rapidly. We have grown beyond just being an awards competition, but a holistic growth accelerator and community for design enthusiasts, both students and practicing professionals. By working closely with our network of passionate mentors and judges, the AYDA journey offers hands-on and out-of-classroom experience for our student participants. This is vital in helping young designers reach maturity upon graduating and entering the world of spatial design with a socially conscious heart in their pocket. Through the valuable sharing and guidance from our outstanding mentors and lecturers, our participants will acquire relevant technical skills, explore being creative with designs, and be able to better understand market needs. Many of our beloved alumni are on an ongoing journey to better impact the future by interpreting the pinnacle of good designs. Since 2018, AYDA has been awarding our international winners an opportunity to attend the 6-week Design Discovery Program by Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, with all expenses paid. Unfortunately, in 2020, COVID-19 swooped in and struck us, but AYDA has never stopped being resilient against the sudden surge of negativity. We believe in preserving hardship and embracing innovation until the day we can harvest the fruit of our success. Despite the pandemic, the 1,200 partnering educational institutions across Asia share our sentiment. The number of entries did not dwindle, and participating students' morale alongside their mentors has never been stronger. With AYDA going beyond Asia, we are persistently amplifying creativity and unearthing hidden talents within every young designer. We will continue to encourage our future young leaders to be bold, innovative, and committed to changing the world with significant impact. Be part of the AYDA family and join us in cultivating passionate, design communities.
For over 130 years, our culture of innovation has shaped the lives of millions. Building better, brighter, and happier lives full of color and opportunities. It all stems from breakthrough research meticulously developed by leading scientists and chemists at our world-leading facilities. We're all part of a diverse family who, together, make Nippon Paint Asia's #1 paint and coatings manufacturer, offering a complete paint and coating solution for total peace of mind. We're a Pan-Asian family unified and driven by our lean for growth culture of vigilance, insatiable appetite, teamwork, agility, leanness, stamina, allowing us to lead from the front of the pack. Corporate responsibility is ingrained in our DNA, promoting sustainability and developing skills, because people have always been at the heart of our company. Together, we strive for a sustainable business that positively impacts lives. Our ingenuity flows through every drop of the billion liters of paint and coatings we produce every year, adding color to all the industries we supply through strong distribution, and in turn enriched the lives of millions around the world. We continue to set new standards in coatings for motor vehicles. Our protective coatings sustain and enhance the performance of bridges, ships, fuel pipes, and chemical tanks. By offering developers and architects a variety of highly durable and weather-resistant options, we make it possible to realize their ambitions. And for our consumers, we strive to deliver the best end-to-end solutions, including design services to perfectly complement our products. We are Nippon Paint. We harness the brilliance of innovation. We inspire the lives of millions now and for decades to come.
The world is truly extraordinary, filled with amazing wonders of nature and breathtaking sceneries in which every human being is unique in their own special way. We are all different in genders, ages, and identities, from diverse family backgrounds, regions, ethnicities, and cultures. We do have one thing in common: ideas. From the things we have seen, the experiences we have gained, and our exposure to the world, we generate infinite ideas to contribute to our society's social, economic, and cultural values, to help build and enhance the world we live in. The world needs change now more than ever, and a push for revolutionary innovation which will thrust us towards improving the quality of our lives. AYDA is determined to positively build a community of enthusiastic, outstanding, and compassionate spatial designers. We believe we can provide more to the world through our efforts. Founded in 2008, AYDA aims to help nurture the talents of tomorrow, together with leading architects and interior designers of our generation. Over the years, AYDA has evolved to become an international community in 16 countries and regions and expanding rapidly. We have grown beyond just being an awards competition, but a holistic growth accelerator and community for design enthusiasts, both students and practicing professionals. By working closely with our network of passionate mentors and judges, the AYDA journey offers hands-on and out-of-classroom experience for our student participants. This is vital in helping young designers reach maturity upon graduating and entering the world of spatial design with a socially conscious heart in their pocket. Through the valuable sharing and guidance from our outstanding mentors and lecturers, our participants will acquire relevant technical skills, explore being creative with designs, and be able to better understand market needs. Many of our beloved alumni are on an ongoing journey to better impact.
I'll leave admission to you. All right.
Recording in progress.
All right. Am I supposed to appear now, Jenna? All right. And we are officially live. All right, very good evening, very good afternoon, very good morning to everyone. Welcome to the AYDA Awards webinar for the November edition. So it's really an exciting day, evening, again, because of the time difference. I feel like I am the one having a time difference problem, not everyone else. Anyway, good evening. Today joining us, we have Safir, Francesca, Gerald, and Mina. They are amazing designers and people who work in design, not necessarily designers specifically. And we're here to discuss about design justice and how do designers bring in or incorporate or blend in or practice, whatever word that you're comfortable with, is how do we bring design justice into practice? So just to help everyone to start on the same page, right? Architectural design thinking have historically erased marginalized people, and they've I think we'll elaborate later, but in many cases around the world, not just design, but in the economy as well, that there has been a lot of unsuccessful attempts, policies, cases, circumstances where we fail to address the disadvantage across class, races, gender, identity. I think in the simpler words, it would be a lot of design in general are simply not inclusive enough. It is not diverse enough to encapsulate and capture the needs of people, especially marginalized community and underserved community that may not have a stronger presence of their voice in the mainstream society or mainstream media. So today we'll talk about how do we go beyond user-centered design and how do we liberate communities, and through that process with the intention that we want to liberate communities, what can we do and what can we do and what should we do when it comes to practicing in terms of scale, whether today I affect one person or today I affect a whole city, or am I planning for the whole world, and how do we then bring this skill set is one thing, I think. Perspective is another thing. And the third part, I think, which is more important from our speakers, would be how do we find our core at this juncture, right? All four of our speakers have their respective experiences, which they will share. So I think without further ado, let's jump into this. So on behalf of Asia Young Designer Awards and the Nippon Paint, I would like to welcome our speakers. So let's start with our experiences, our journeys, and our observation, and our limited ability as a designer, maybe when we first started out, some of us are first started out, some of us might go further down the road. You know, there are different parts of us in a different juncture in our career. So I would like to hear from all four of you. How did you get into design? Who are we? And what does design justice mean to you at this point? I think at this point where you know, I think with COVID-19, with the pandemic hitting the world, it is also extra that we can empathize even stronger now than before, and it forces us to think differently. And I think the silver lining of the pandemic, I mean, it's a horrible disaster for everyone, but I think the silver lining coming out of it is a lot of people realize that there's a lot we can do, even though there's no physical proximity. So maybe we start with Safir. Like, hello.
Hey, hi, and it's a
Hey.
pleasure to meet everyone.
Yeah. So you okay? Shall we go circle, or everyone just start with their own story and then we go one by one? How do you guys want to do this? Which is more comfortable for you?
I think it works to just go around. Brandon, I think you can just pick, you can just call people, and I think we should be good.
Okay. And Safia, you want to go last?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. Let's start with
Gladly.
Francesca then. Francesca, I know you're in Spain now. It's kind of lunchtime, before lunch.
Well, a bit before. We have late lunch here, so I've got a couple of hours before I have lunch.
Okay, so Francesca, tell me about a bit what you've done and what you're doing. And I know you're doing a lot now in Spain and a lot of exciting things that you're working on. Yeah.
First of all, thank you all for being here. Thanks to AYDA Awards for inviting me to this session, and thank you to Safir, Mina, and Jo for sharing this incredible opportunity. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. My name is Francesca Heathcote. I lived in London and studied in London for 10 years. I used to work there as well. I specialized in urban design and city planning, and I did all of my theses on homelessness and how to find different ways and approaches to try and reduce the risks that happen once you become homeless. The whole program was called Bounce Back. And was based very much on the fact that once you start living on the street, it's really difficult to get back on your feet, because you stop having an address, you stop having a bank account, you stop being able to shower. So there's a lot of things associated. And the more time you spend on the street, the less you're able to bounce back from it. So the whole concept was based on creating quick little tools that would help you return into and reintegrate into society. So that was what I did. And then later on, I worked at a big engineering firm. They were diversifying. And so we helped build the urban design team, and we started winning projects. And we won a very big bid for a civic project for a town hall in London, which was trying to create a better place for the community, which was undergoing also a transformational change in terms of work environment, and providing additional residential units, because in London there's been a shortage. Okay, so that's a bit about me before my new me, which is about 3 years ago. I moved back to Madrid. I was originally born in Madrid, although my mother's Italian and my father's half Dutch, half British. I was born here and raised here, and all my family is we're a very small family, but we're all based in different places across Spain. And I'm lucky enough that my mother founded an architectural and interior design firm 30 years ago. And we never planned to work together, but 3 years ago, I was looking to move maybe to Asia, to Latin America, and she made me a job offer, and without even interviewing me. So I felt very lucky about that part. And we became business partners. Okay, so we both run a female-led company within the architectural and interior design environment. She's been doing it for 30 years. I joined 3 years ago. And we work across many different sectors. I think the main pillars of our firm are based on quality. We really care about quality, and we really care about creating projects that are a bit like tailor-made for people. And of course, depending on the project, for different types of people. We do some urban work, especially small scale. So we do car parkings, designer car parkings for public and private clients. And we also do interventions like bridges or Christmas lighting, or little things to improve the quality of life of the city of Madrid, especially, but also other cities. And actually later on, I'll show you some of these so you can get a bit of an idea. The last urban big project we did was a gift after COVID. We decided to gift the city of Madrid with an entire new Christmas lighting project that was trying to cheer up the city and the citizens post-pandemic. Okay, that was a gift from our company too. We also work on the side with on voluntary projects. So we are very closely with a community of people that have mental health issues, and we do workshops with them to help them get better and to get them involved with color. And the last project we did was translating a painting of El Bosco, the garden of, it's called El Jardín de las Delicias. It's a garden of pleasure, so to speak, by El Bosco, which is a very famous painter in Spain historically. And we did it all in AutoCAD, and we printed it as if it was a plan. And then we did it in 3D with them, and then it got auctioned off and gifted as a present to an ambassador. So it became a whole thing, and anyway, it was quite exciting. So that's a bit about me. On the side, I'm also the executive director of a master's in real estate at a school called the SCP Business School, which is a French school with a campus in Madrid. So yeah, not a lot of time left to do anything else.
Yes,
but happy to join. Sorry, the light's coming in from the window and my desk, so it's a bit.
Oh, you look great. It's like, you know, like angelic ray shining on your face. You look great. Don't worry about that.
Anyway.
maybe it hurts your eyes, but it looks great on it. Yeah. So can you just, before I move on to the other three, can you just help me understand, Francesca, how did you get into the topic of homelessness back then? Has it always been like in your radar, or is just something that you just, because in my context, I also work with communities back in Southeast Asia and Malaysia as well. And homelessness is a really complex issue because it ties into so many perspectives, and you cannot treat every homeless person. You can't treat them like data. You have to treat them as individuals. So I'm just curious, how did you end up there? And then, you know, what is that one lesson you've learned from working on homelessness challenges?
I think I moved to London, I think it was 2008, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And from when I moved to when I left in 2018, I saw an increase of people on the roads. So I didn't see as many when I first moved to London, and then maybe they were there, but you couldn't really see them so evidently on the streets. And by the time I was leaving London, I saw that there was many more people you could physically see them, especially around Covent Garden, but not only, like all over the place. Okay. I've always been interested, and one of my first projects when I studied architecture was very much related to using different materials like plastic. So one of my first projects looked at using plastic to create protective layers for homeless people. So it's a topic I've always felt very closely about, because I never quite understood how you get to be homeless, and it's actually really easy. It's much easier than we think.
Yes, it is.
If you don't have a good safety network in place, if you don't, and it's actually, data shows that it's younger and younger people. After the World Wars, it was a generation of older men, especially, that were suffering. Maybe you can't generalize on homelessness, but overall that they were suffering from PTSD and then sort of alcohol consumption. But that's completely shifted. Now we're going into a younger generation of homeless people, much more diverse, much more varied. Sometimes it's just losing a job and not having a safety net to rely on, losing a job, getting a landlord, losing your house because of it, or even just, there's a lot of data that indicates a relationship rupture, a couple living together break up, and that can lead to a lot of other things. So you cannot really generalize, but it's much closer than we think. There were some studies that indicated that 1 in 13 people in the UK had slept rough at least once in their life, which is about, I think, at least 4 people it would be if we were counting how many people are in this room now. So there's a lot of, I mean, it's very, and it's completely decentralized, which also makes the approach very difficult. There's new, so I've always been really interested in, I never could understand, because I have a safety network. I can rely on my family much more easily. they are all in Europe, even if we're not all in the same city. But
At
it's
least
not
the
the
support
case.
network and system is present for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
for a lot of us.
And so I was looking at this and I was trying to understand why we wouldn't see so many women maybe on the streets, or it's very, very complex. And the way to support homelessness, or to not support it, but to support people that are homeless, it's also very complex. Generally, also, there's the misconception that you are an alcoholic and end up being homeless. It's generally the other way around. You're homeless and then you end up being an alcoholic. So it's extremely complicated. I would look at the news and I would hear horrible stories. And I don't know, it's something I always felt very empathically about, and felt like the nobody should really be homeless or have to go through that. So I think that's what always called my attention. And I also was very interested on how on the city, and how there's actually a whole movement on hostile design and hostile architecture, and creating spaces that, as much as they can make you feel well, they can make you feel bad. Right. And I think me as a student of architecture and urban design, and now a professional, to think that you can use this profession to create hostile environments, I find it so dangerous and so scary. So I think it was a mixture of things. So yeah, that's how I ended up getting very involved in the topic.
I think this is really what it resonates really well with me. From I've been doing the AYDA Awards for the past 4 or 5 years, and one of our role is really to inspire students to students around the world, thousands of universities, to really think about an issue that they can resonate with. I always tell people, when it comes to doing good and empathy, you don't have to save the whole world. You just save what you can do. You just do what you can do. It's not about, like a Superman syndrome where you have to save the world, but it's really what we can do within our capacity at that juncture of life that's very important. Thank you so much for sharing, Francisca. So before I move to Mina, I forgot to introduce, we have an amazing doodle artist today with us. His name is Chan Wai. So he will be documenting our conversation and turning it into an amazing piece of work. Our speakers, he already did the illustration of all 4 of you. It looks amazing. And I'm jealous because I'm not in the illustration, because technically I'm not a speaker. My job is to dig stories out from you. So I'm just sad. Maybe Chan Wai can draw one of me when you're free, but no pressure at all. So next I have Mina. Mina recently graduated from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And I know you have a very different perspective and approach to how you do your version of social justice. So Mina, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Brandon, Saphir, Melody, for organizing this. Francesca, Giraud, so good to see you again. A little bit about myself. My name is Mina. I'm a recent graduate student. I'm a recent graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and I earned an architecture degree and a landscape degree. And at the GSD, I was passionate about student advocacy. I served as president of the GSD student body twice, and once as the chair for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Prior to the GSD, I earned a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture and Visual Arts from Bennington College, where I focused on painting and printmaking. And after college, I worked in New York, in New Orleans, and I taught in Karachi at Habib University, which is the first liberal arts school in Karachi. And over there, I taught a class about design in the public realm entitled Urban Intervention. Currently, I'm working as a researcher for Professor Neil Kirkwood from the GSD, where we are conducting research on the Tar Creek brownfield site, where we really focus on exploring technologies of toxic landscape reclamation and their agency in recovering environmental and social equities within a reconsidered critical practice of landscape architecture and design making. Design proposals for the site assisted in the preparation of alternative landscape features on behalf of the local Quapaw tribe, as well as other tribal and non-tribal communities living on and around the vicinity of the Tar Creek Superfund site.
Yep. We'll share this particular project with us later, or I have to dig more now. Is this something you'd share later, or? I'm just wondering, what are the challenges, or what are the great takeaways working with a local community, and maybe you can share that with us as well.
For sure. Yeah, I think that I'm going to be presenting two other projects
Yeah.
today that both discuss engaging with the community in different ways. But in my capacity on this project, it was more as a researcher and a facilitator than a designer. And I was also assisting the class in in their projects. And I think that the main takeaway is establishing, it was really difficult to work with local communities during COVID, and we weren't able to visit these sites. And site visits, I think, are extremely important in in the design process. But also understanding that everyone's coming from, when you start working in design and even teaching, everyone's coming from different countries, everyone's coming from um, different backgrounds, and it's really important to establish history and establish a shared knowledge base when it comes to design. So even throughout the course of the project, I was realizing that some students just weren't truly absorbing perhaps the history of the Native American history in America, and you can't exactly expect everyone to understand that. I think a lot of Americans don't even understand that, but really educating in the traditional sense
Yeah.
in is really important, and you can't really go to the next step without establishing that knowledge.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Mina. So from Francesca to Mina, everyone can, yes, everyone's online with us here. You can be practicing design, you can be aspired to practice design, or you can be not a designer at all, like me, right? Like, just like this is the fun thing, because every time I talk to people about design, they just assume that I am a designer, that I work. But the fact that I don't know design in the sense that I have never studied or practiced design, but what really interests me is the impact of design on people's well-being, the impact of design on how people interact with each other. I come from a background where I study behavior, where I study media, and it's always really fun to see what I do is always so close knitted to what you guys do. Like for example, even like Mina as well, I think being an AR grad doesn't mean that you are practicing AR in the design form, but you're doing the research and facilitation side of work, which I think it's also equally important, if not more important. I think setting up the frame right for us to scale up what we call so-called good design or beneficial design or impactful design. So that ties to the next person, Gerard, who is working on urban planning a lot. Yeah, Gerard, would you like to share what's
Sure.
going in your head? What's going in your
What's
mind?
going on in my head?
Yeah,
No,
like I know you have a lot to say about soul searching, looking for something that resonates with us before we even go into planning design for people. Yeah.
I appreciate that invitation, Brandon, and also thank you so much for the opportunity to be on this panel and to be in conversation with the rest of you. And I'm just thinking, I mean, a lot of what I've been thinking about has to do with what you were just saying, Mina, about teaching and traditional teaching, but also really, I think the skills that we develop and the way that we develop in order to be able to enter effectively into conversations about justice and to act in a way that advances justice. So I'm not an architect. I almost went to architecture school for college, and then at the last minute kind of pivoted away. And then again, almost went to architecture school for graduate school and chose to do urban planning instead. So I'm studying planning in a design school, and sometimes I will take on the mantle of designer, but it's something that I've asked myself a lot about. What is it about architecture, about this way of thinking that keeps speaking to me? And if I'm not going to be an architect, are there things about that I want to carry with me? And the way that I think about it right now at this stage is that I think it really has to do with the stories that I understand that places tell us. And I think back, so my family is originally from France. I grew up between France and the United States and India. And I think about when I was in high school and I had moved to Paris. I think of my relationship to the architecture of that city, this very kind of tightly regulated very beautiful, certainly, architecture that to me came to symbolize, if I'm honest, it symbolized power, it symbolized cultural power, it symbolized this idea that of like the kind of the quality, the excellence of a certain kind of culture. And I looking back, I realized how much I attributed judgments to neighborhoods, and to the people who lived in those neighborhoods, to institutions based on this idea that I was buying into of what the architecture represented. And an even more poignant example is I was living in India with my family, and we also traveled quite a bit when I was young. And looking back, I see how much, I think of specific places. I think of this one hotel, but colonial architecture, the white columns of Delhi's colonial architecture, spoke to this idea that I saw my family really kind of gravitating towards, that, wanting to stay in those hotels, wanting to learn the history of those buildings, being curious about that. And with hindsight, I'm like, wait a minute, those are the buildings that are emblematic of some of the most devastating periods in those countries' histories, and of this power dynamic in which, where I come from, France or Europe, was subjugating entire other people. So what does it mean that that's the architecture that we were attracted to? So the question that I've really been posing myself is around this power that architecture has to influence the social ecosystem that it's a part of, to influence how we understand and how we relate to the power relations, and culturally what it is that's valued and isn't in any given context. I can be a little bit more precise about my trajectory. So I studied international development. I thought that I might want to do architecture, but really wanted to understand problems better before I learned what felt like a tool set to address them. And brought design thinking, and was taking architectural studios kind of where I could fit them in college. I wrote my thesis on informal settlements in Mumbai, and I had the chance to spend some time there to do fieldwork research. And then I worked for 2 years with Mass Design Group, which is an architecture firm that asked these questions of how architecture can, at the time, was asking the question of how architecture can create social impact. And I think today is asking a little bit more critically how architecture either is a reflection of the social systems in a place, or can challenge those, can challenge the ways in which power and injustice are playing out. Mm-hmm. In terms of it, when I think something that frustrates me is the idea of design being taught as a formal discipline that really is about the shape of things, about the aesthetic of things, devoid of context. And I think in architecture in particular, I see that at the Graduate School of Design. And I think of a moment that I had in a studio, a planning studio, where a professor named Lily Song asked me, what exactly are the assumptions that you're making about people as you're starting this project? Who do you think that you're working for, and what do you think that you're bringing to them? And then B, what are those values? What are those goals that you're trying to enact through this project? What problem are you trying to solve, or what values are you trying to solve for? And I think that set of questions is the one that I always try to come back to, and that I think that as designers, we need to challenge ourselves to come back to. But to me, that opens to the point that you were making, Mina, about education. I think very often we choose not to look. We choose not to ask that question of fundamentally, what are the injustices that we are trying to address, that we're trying to rectify? And so something that I've been asking myself is, what does it take for us to develop our capacity to do that? I think so much of activism is trying to get people to look, trying to get people to see something that they do not see, which is that fundamentally something is going on that is harming people in the way that social relations exist. Mm-hmm. So how do you actually do that?
So it's more like, let's take a step back, as in, how do we remove this veil of ignorance that is covering us, that's been protecting us from the harsh reality and the cruel reality? And I think as designers, or designers to be, or designers, or people who work with designers as well, I think the biggest question is, I think it's also the trend of where everyone's moving towards, not just architecture and spatial design as a profession, but a lot of profession is moving towards what do people really want? What do people really need? Versus, actually not so much of what people want, but more so what community truly needs. And it's also very interesting, there are data about COVID-19 and how it makes people realize that we live in a horrible space. Like just now, Francesca, I mean, I think all of us have touched this a little bit just now, that how an environment can either bring us up or bring us down. And I think because of COVID and everyone's stuck at home, you realize that your home is never a home. Your home feels like a slum. And I think that's when people start to have more empathy for other people who are from a different community. Because, you know, when we are all in the same storm, and then you realize that your roof isn't really helpful when it comes to fighting against the storm. So yeah, so thank you for sharing so much. Yeah. And then can I get Safir to share your perspective, Safir?
Yeah, certainly. I describe myself as an urban designer and planner, but a lot of the work I do right now is based in consulting. I work at a firm called Bureau Hatbold in the New York office, and I'd say my time is split around 80% on mobility projects. That's transportation planning and getting less, trying to figure out ways to get less cars on the road. Mm-hmm. And 20% of my time is spent on climate planning, whether that's resilience, adaptation, trying to figure out who's most at risk of the impacts of climate change, and trying to find out ways to mitigate that. Mm-hmm. My journey is, I think, a pretty interesting one. I'm from India by way of Dubai and England before moving here. And in high school, I really wanted to be an architect. Much like Giraud, I always toyed with the idea. I ended up studying architecture and urban planning in college. But as I was studying it, much like you were saying, it was slowly starting to feel a little disheartening that a lot of design focused specifically on the form of things and not often on people. And it made me wonder why I wanted to go to architecture school in the first place. And a lot of it was because growing up in Dubai, a lot of form is architecture. And it's not really based on, you know, the target audience. It's not based on the who, but rather on the what. And so for that reason, I wanted to focus on that piece, the who. But I really love design work. I really enjoyed the broad set of tools that it offers you as a practitioner. And so I did my master's in urban design and city planning in London. And while I was there, it was a really interesting experience because a big part of my education was based on process more than outcome. And that's something that I bring with me today because when we think about places, they're not static. They're not just, you know, it's not just the lines on the paper that get built and get given to a contractor. It's something that that's going to evolve over time. It's something that people are going to shape in their own way, regardless of what the designer does. And so I think the designer's role is really as a facilitator, and we're a medium between the community and really the outcome that they want. And so after I did my master's in urban design, I practiced as an urban designer at a firm called Node in Birmingham. And it was an interesting experience because we were working on a wide range of projects, city center master plans, institutional planning, and so on. But it always felt like our impact was limited by the skills that we had in some ways, because the only solutions that we had most of the time would end up being, well, either we can, you know, incorporate this into our design, or we can't think about it. And similarly to what Francesca was saying, there were a lot of challenges working in cities where there were a lot of people who were unhoused. There were a lot of people experiencing homelessness, and as an urban designer, it's very difficult to get some of these tools implemented. And so I wanted to broaden that set of tools that I had. And so I applied to come to the GSD, and very generously was given the AYDA fellowship by Nippon Paint. And that's how I met Brandon and Melody and the team. And I can see Brandon celebrating, but yeah, it was a great day. And at the GSD, I wanted to focus on the pieces of design that designers don't often engage with. So things like urban analytics, about interrogating data that we have, about thinking about public policy, thinking about finance, things that don't often enter the realm of design, but have such a huge impact on it. And I think that all of these were tied together by the thread of thinking about participation. I'll get into it in a little more detail in the project section, but I think that participation, I mean, we all talk about, how do we reach these people? How do we talk to people in a community and so on? But at the end of the day, if we host the most amazing event and no one shows up, then we need to make sure that, the purpose of this, of that exercise is diluted. And so I thought a lot about things like, who are our stakeholders? What are some ways that we can engage them better? And what are some ways that they can actually have meaningful impact instead of just being participants? How can they end up actually impacting the design and influencing it? And let's see. So one of the projects I'm working on right now is it's called the Verdugo Wash, and it's a tributary of the LA River. It's a man-made wash, which is just a concrete tributary that's in Glendale, California, which is just outside the city of LA, and it feeds into the LA River. And this is a large infrastructure project that we're working on creating a vision for. And one of the challenges here is that the wash goes through a lot of different neighborhoods, and the question always arises, which neighborhood are we going to make the focus of the wash? We can't have, it's 9 miles long. It can't be as intense everywhere. And that's a big part of the debate. It's, which part of this neighborhood can we actually influence? And some of the analytical work that I'm doing is trying to find out what some of the demographic indicators are of people who would actually benefit from this wash from a risk and vulnerability perspective, and also from a climate perspective. There's a lot of, if any of you have been to LA, I haven't, unfortunately, but there's a lot of gray, there's a lot of concrete, there's a lot of heat. And having a wash like this that's going to be converted into a linear park, a piece of community infrastructure, is a great way to create some of those spaces that people can benefit from, that provide new green space, that provide space for recreation for families that might not have a front or a backyard. And so these are some of the pieces that we're pulling at with that project.
Yeah. So I think. Okay, so I had to give our doodle artist 5 minutes advance so that he can show us what he has done. So Chanwai, this is your 5 minutes cue, yeah? Okay, anyway, back to Safir. Yeah, so I think okay, I will come in. I may make enemies by making statements like this. Chanwai, Chanwai, you can take your time while I just do a summary of the first section, okay? See, you beautiful faces are there. I know, I'm so envious. Anyway, sorry, back was what I was saying, Safir, yes. As an educator, I am a lecturer as well. I teach in some parts of Asia, and I think the thing with a lot of conventional way of education or tertiary education being deployed is that it's very much of, yes, I think it is true. I mean, everything has an economic pressure. There must be an economical reason why we study, because we are part of the workforce. But I think what a lot of education programs don't offer, or perspectives that they don't offer, is what does the society need and who am I? I think a lot of graduates, I think even through my 5 years with the Asia Young Designer Awards as well, when my finalists or even my participants reach when we first worked with them before they joined the competition, they don't know who they are and what they want to do. And I think it's through that AYDA journey, which is quite stressful for them. It's a one-year journey where they have to work with a lot of local mentors and lecturers just to come out with a concept that could potentially, be impactful for the local community. And I think it's that through that process, people learn who they are. And I think for you guys as well, 4 of you, I think it really helps us define who we are. And once we know who we are, we know what we want to work on. And I think that's what's very important when it comes to design justice, because I think that justice portion also comes from empathy. It comes from questioning, why is the world such a way and what can I do to, make people better? So yeah, Changwei, did I speak too fast? He's doing like really quickly, But yeah, thank you guys for session 1. I think it's okay, Changwei, you don't have to be stressed out by me. You can just show us what you already have, and then we can work on it later. But I think this is a good warm-up. We have about 60, 70 attendees. Not as much as I want, but again, we started the promotion late. So, but anyway, usually we'll have another 2,000-3,000 views after that. So I think whatever we share here will be a great stepping stone for a lot of budding designers. So Chanwei, how do you want to do this? Will you show us what you have done so far? That's amazing, right? Okay, you will complete it later on. I really like that above Francesca's face is a person that closes his eye. It's like, I think the easiest way out is just to not look. I think being ignorant seems to be like, the best thing to do, the easiest thing to do. Yeah, so yeah. Anyway, Chanwei, you take your time. I know I talk really fast, we talk really fast. So yeah, so maybe Chanwei, you can go back to work, take your time. I will look forward to the final work while we go into sharing, project sharing with all 4 of our speakers. Safir, how shall we start this? What's the flow like? By scale, right? Is it by scale or?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we do that?
Okay, so we start with you first, is it?
All right, sounds good.
Okay, Safir, over to you.
All right, 1 second. Right, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, a lot of the points that I talked about earlier about participation, I want to illustrate some of the projects that by showing you some of the projects I've worked on in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So right, so this was a project that I did in Newcastle. It's a participatory design project. And the typical way that community engagement happens in the UK and in the US as well is that the designer and the planner and a few city officials will organize an event. They'll say at 6:30 p.m. we're going to have a town hall. Come to this town hall and let's all talk about our work. And the issue with that is that if you're it ends up amplifying voices of the people who can make it to that one meeting. If you're a single mom, or if you work more than one job, or if you if you have childcare responsibilities, it's very hard to show up to a single session like that. And so we wanted to create ways to gain feedback for a design project that wasn't just a single session. And part of the way to do that was by urban prototyping. And this is a concept that my professor, Professor Armel Tardivaux, had come up with, which was why don't we create like one-to-one interventions in public space that people can come and see, that they can touch and interact with, and it can be on the way to where they are. It doesn't have to be in the town hall. It can be in a town center. It can be where people end up traversing on their daily route anyway. And so this was a pretty fast-paced, quick and dirty one-to-one model that we built that wanted to explore all these different themes for a plan for a park for the community center. And it was really interesting to talk to people, to see the way that they were able to visualize what some of these ideas were. It wasn't really about showing them drawings; it was about showing them ideas and seeing what their responses were to them. And a lot of the things that came out of that were ideas like people want shade, they want respite from the elements. So they wanted things that were covered if possible, which was interesting because in Newcastle there's not a lot of sun, and typically like the sun is a big part of the park. But when it's a little bit damp, when you have kids, it's a lot harder to manage and those open spaces. The second key point was that they wanted spaces for intergenerational interaction. And so it was about places where children and older adults alike can spend time together and share experiences. And so this was just a quick run through through that project at like the scale of the of the human at like what we can touch in public space. Next, I want to move to like the city scale and how we think about participation when it comes to planning in the public sector. So this was done when I was at the GSD. It was my first semester core urban planning studio project. And this is the site here. And as you can see, the western half of the site is primarily industrial land. It's very underutilized. Boston, as you can see by the rest of the city, is very, very dense. And there's a need for housing. So we wanted to find a way to accommodate housing on this site. But at the same time, cities across the world really are losing industrial land. And industrial land is really important, not for the economy, not necessarily for the economy, but mostly because of the industrial ecology that it lends, the type of workers that it attracts. There's a pipeline there that doesn't require a high upfront investment. It's not very expensive to go to trade school like it might be to go to other institutions. And so it's really important, we felt that it was very important to maintain industrial spaces in cities. And so part of the way that we wanted to do that was, of course, through our urban design guidelines that focused on use that would be tied together by a public realm. And so it would be about having light industry and heavy industry. There's a growing distinction between the two. Heavy industry is what we think about when we think about industry. It's manufacturing, things that are noisy, things that might be disruptive. But then there's also light industry. And light industry is growing in the city of Boston, particularly with biotech and a lot of these different sectors. And so we wanted to use light industry as a buffer to the housing that we would have in this site. And also, as I said, we wanted to use the public realm to connect the two spaces. It's not always possible to, I think typically there are live-work units in these sort of projects. But I think live-work units are kind of hard to maintain. There's no guarantee that the people who work there are going to be able to afford it. There's no guarantee that they would want to live there. They already have their own intricate social networks. They already have a connection to the city that we want to maintain. And so for that reason, we wanted to create a bridge, a physical connection between industrial parts of the site as well as the more residential and commercial parts. And so once we had that down, that's really the design element of the project. Very quick. The next step is really trying to find out how we can engage with people and how we can gain feedback for this plan, how we can involve people in the plan. And for this, I want to look to this model of citizen participation from Arnstein. It's from 1969. It's really the foundational piece of citizen participation. And really, there are three main steps. It's inform, consult, and involve. And really, the higher you move up this ladder, the harder it gets to move to the next step. So after the consult stage, especially building up partnerships and eventually, hopefully, citizen control are really, really hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I looked at what the city does, what the city of Boston does right now. And here are the steps. You know, you meet people where they are, set the context, define expectations, you listen and analyze, and then you take action and you communicate intent. But here's the gap. It's inform, consult, and then the last step is to just inform that they consulted, which felt pretty shallow. And so I wanted to take that a few steps further, two pieces. One, by building long-term partnerships, and two, by increasing civic capacity. And so for that, I wanted to identify who some of the people that we needed to reach out to are. And for that, there's the public sector, institutions, a lot of trade institutions and training institutions are direct pipelines to current and future workers. And so the next one is civil society. So it's people who are perhaps residents there, the people who have businesses in this industrial site and around it. And finally, it's the role of the developer. So I started by looking at the city of Boston, and I think it's really important as designers, not necessarily only as planners, to identify what the political landscape is and what the bureaucratic landscape is for a city where you practice in. And this is important because if you actually want to get anything built beyond just having the drawings, you really need to be able to navigate all of these different pieces. And and so I identified what some of the pieces were that we'd be able to gain from reaching out to these different people in the city of Boston. In civil society, I think the key piece here is reaching out to workers. I think a lot of community engagement will end up being a few of the largest property owners, a few of the business owners, and ideally one or two community groups. But I think a key piece here is engaging in the workers, because the workers, as I mentioned earlier, don't all reside in one place. They have a pretty wide base. And if we look back at the city of Boston, you'd see that the mayor's office is a big part of it. And so having a wider base means that more constituencies are incorporated and have a stake in this plan. Next, for institutions, like I said, it's really important to meet people where they are. And what better way to do that than through an institution? They already provide vocational training. They're already doing a lot of the work that one would want from like an industrial master plan in 2020. And so because they provide this direct pipeline, we wanted to be able to include them just to know exactly, it's a direct communication channel with workers. And finally, when it comes to developers, this site is a complex assemblage that has publicly owned and privately owned pieces of land. And so we identified that for the publicly owned parcels, it's easier to have a little more control over who builds. And for that reason, we put out an RFP for a nonprofit developer. And for the private parcels, we would want to use a for-profit developer, but also incorporate something like a density bonus, which is where if you're able to provide more affordable housing, you can build a little bit more on the land that you have. And so that was how I identified the who. But then the next step is where do they come in? Where do we include them in the process? And so for that, there are two key pieces. There's plan formulation and there's the actual development. So in plan formulation, there are all these different steps, but the key places to plug in different stakeholders is the formation of an oversight committee, which is a requirement for plan making. But a lot of the time, the oversight committee doesn't have a lot of community groups. It doesn't often include local trade unions. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that we wanted to include here. The next step is that the plan is typically presented to city council and it's passed by the city councilors and by the mayor. But to be able to push for things that might not otherwise get built, things like investing in public realm and in industrial sites. It's not something that often happens, if based on my experience in the UK or in the US or even in Dubai and India as well. And so the unions really have a lot of power here because of their wide base to show political support for these plans and to really push for the pieces that are important to them. For the plan development stage, the city of Boston has a wide feedback section for during plan development, but I think it's important to go a little bit deeper and again engage the unions, engage the workers and the institutions into this step. And yeah, that's it from me. I just want to close by saying that as planners and designers, I think there are two key takeaways here. One is that we need to dissociate ourselves from the notion that we are the experts. There's like all of these people, that are represented here know more about the project. They know more about the site than we do. And really, we need to leverage a lot of that knowledge, a lot of that expertise into our project. And the second piece is that it takes a lot of savvy to be able to navigate all these different pieces. And whether you're studying or practicing architecture or urban design or landscape architecture or interiors, I think it's important to understand what some of those different people dynamics are in the places that we operate in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's everything from me.
Thank you, Safir. Don't unshare, the tech team will do it for us.
Sure.
So from what I hear from you is, first, we really need to learn how to navigate, understand the decision makers and the decision-making process within where we work based on whether it's a city or it's a country. I think it does get very different in terms of stakeholder dynamics and power dynamics from one city to another. It's also understand the dynamics before we can even make changes. So thanks, Safir, for sharing. Okay, let's do this thing. Why don't you point out the next person and then we'll just go on. I'll let you pick who should go next.
All right, Francesca, why don't you go next?
Wow, I laughed too loud, even if you couldn't hear me. At the pick pointing format. Thank you, Saf. That was really interesting. Thank you all for sharing your experiences. I think that's incredibly valuable and extraordinary. I'm in the office, so there might be some background noise. I apologize for that. I'm just going to tell everyone just a minute to keep it a bit low, okay? So bear with me.
Thank you so much. That's so cute. Thank you so much for doing
Sorry
this.
about that. But we are a Mediterranean office, so we are extremely loud constantly. I'm very emotional. Okay, so I'm going to share with you. I've selected basically 1, 2, 3, sort of 4 projects. Okay, I'm going to share them slowly. I mean, one is the homelessness. That was my research project at university, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start by that. Okay, this is just really briefly, we're not going to read it all. Of course, it's an academic work with a sort of tangible result, but the idea behind it especially is especially linked to Europe, really, and to the system of homelessness in Europe, which is very much decentralized. And there's no support. It was, the main focus was UK, of course, because that's where I was living and studying at the time, and where I had more access to different resources, networks, and so on. The idea was to provide different interventions in the urban realm, so that they would help people bounce back if they had to end up on the road. Okay, and this is because one of the main reasons we saw, one of the main things we started to see when I started doing all this research, which also, sorry, has a very, very academic focus, but all the sort of sociological framework behind it it had a lot to do with the fact that when you don't have an address in the UK, you can't do anything. Basically, you can't have social security, you can't have a bank account, you can't, and not only in the UK, of course, this is applicable also, for example, in Spain. So once you lose your home, you lose a right that for me is fundamental to all these services that are associated with having an address. Okay, so really, well, this is very much in summary, but the introduction was looking a lot at data. Of course, data and homelessness are very separated and very unrealistic, because it's very difficult to quantify different things that have to do with homelessness, especially it's completely decentralized. So each local authority has their own strategy, and it's very much led also by organizations and foundations and charities. So they all have very different data, okay? But roughly some of the information that we found, you can see it at the bottom, 1 in 65 people worldwide were homelessness in 2005, was just an enormous amount of people. 3 million people are homeless in the European Union. 70% of European Union homeless are under 40 years old. Here's the shift, okay, in generation. In the UK, at least 1 in 13 people have slept rough at least once. And in the UK, numbers have doubled since 2010. And that's the phenomenon I was starting to see, okay, and there's a lot of people on waiting lists to access social housing, okay? And it has to do, specific to the UK context, it has a lot to do with the fact that in 1981, Thatcher passed a bill that had a lot to do with the right to buy. So a lot of people living in social housing had a right to purchase that social housing, which on one side was good, but on the other one, it meant that there's a lack of social housing, okay, because it's being privatized, okay? And you are allowed to actually privatize social housing. So there's a lot of social housing that was delivered in brutalist and iconic buildings, and then these have been taken over and have been privatized, okay? So it's sort of, this was a sort of the concept, okay? And on one side, it had to do with service provision, and on the other one with open spaces, which is where you end up sleeping rough. And the concept was trying to enable to break the hostile design and the ineligibility, and help you by yourself regain self-esteem and bounce back with dignity, okay? The research question, so to speak, is, can we design services within the public realm for rough sleepers in order to help them bounce back and reintegrate into society more autonomously, okay? So there was this dilemma between the public realm and the home, okay, which sort of, the home has a roof, the public realm doesn't, okay? These are some of the objectives, but it was about helping rough sleepers reintegrate, about empowering rough sleepers with autonomy, about providing high quality and hospitable open spaces, and raising awareness about rough sleepers to the community. Well, of course, I mean, it's a very long document, but just very briefly, the literature it's very extensive. There's a lot of literature about homelessness. And there's a lot of literature about hostile design. There's a whole concept called the revanchist city that has a lot to do with this. And sort of key point, homelessness is on the rise, okay? And we don't want to look at it, we don't want to see it. There's also a lot of discomfort in looking at homeless people in the eyes, okay? And so it has to do a lot with dignity as well, and self-esteem, okay? And sort of, if we don't look at it straight in the eyes, then it's not there, or we don't want to interact with it, okay? So when I was doing this, I did go on the streets and I did speak to people, and they're people, okay? They're not as scary as they might feel, or as we might think, or as we might have a misconception. So there's a lot of barriers that need to be broken down at a macro social level. There's sort of housing market, political changes and economic changes. And at a more micro level, it has a lot to do with abuse, family estrangement, and health and mental illness, okay? These are sort of some, you know, looking at the context, at definitions, okay? There's a lot of people, well, there's a mindset, there's a cultural mindset where we believe that if you're homeless, you don't deserve help somehow. You ended up there because, I mean, you weren't able to sort it out. It's your responsibility. It's not the way it is, okay? It's much more easier than we think. Also, there's if you're able to bounce back quicker from the street, it means it's more likely to reintegrate properly, so to speak, into society. Whereas if you don't bounce back quick enough, it's a roll-balling chain, okay? And at architectural point of view, there's of course all these problems with space, okay? And with the spatial design, okay? Here are some examples, okay, designing spaces. Well, examples are the privatization of public space, where of course, was it allows good urban development practice with PPLs and private-public partnerships. When the land becomes private, it means it can be controlled. This happens in King's Cross, for example, great redevelopment, but when people are walking through it, they can be told to leave the site, okay? Or even something more simple like the seating of bus stops where you cannot lie down, so you cannot sleep, you can only lean, or the design of benches that are really tedious and uncomfortable, or that get divided by armrests and so on, okay? These are just some quick examples, okay? So also the lack of centralization, okay? You've got the GLA legislation, local authorities, but everybody's doing their own thing. And then the non-statutory, not-for-profit organizations that try to help, but they cannot get to everyone. And then, of course, there's other people helping. There's housing associations, it's family and friends and private organizations, okay? But it has a lot to do with eligibility, fear, the non-suitable, misconception, also faith, for example. A lot of churches are trying to help. But if you are from a different faith from that church, you might not want to go to that church. There's also a lot of people who are sleeping rough have dogs, a bit for protection also, and also because dogs are good companions, actually, and they do keep company and help. But a lot of places that offer accommodation don't allow dogs to go in. So it's a lot of different things, okay? So the idea was to create, these are some proposals that we've started to see emerge. Parasite, which you plug into the vents of the building and it sort of creates a temporary tent, or this jacket that is also a tent, or different sort of portable sleeping spaces. There's a lot of research going into this and has been going on. Communicating homelessness is another really important issue. And these are some case studies, okay? Lockers to have an address, which has been implemented in Portugal, for example, the People's Fridge in Brixton, and many others, okay? But they're all independent, okay? So the idea for the Bounce Back Toolkit was to provide spaces where you could sleep, where you could access food, where you could access toilets and shower. Another problem is that maybe you get a job interview and you cannot really present yourself properly groomed somehow. And so it has a lot to do with dignity and self-esteem and the right. These are basic human rights we're talking about. We're not talking about a fancy suitcase or a fancy bag or a fancy phone. We're talking about basic needs, okay? So this is what the service provision looked at implementing types of spaces for bed and shelter, food and drink, toilets, showers, laundries, clothing, health support and kids, postal addresses, which are so important, some sort of skills and education training, pet space, information and leisure. All of this injected into the urban space so that people can access it for free, okay? And that was sort of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs applied to these type of service toolkits, okay? And how to make it work, okay? So, well, this was just starting to look at what type of space things needed, what time and presence these elements could have within the public realm, whether they were pop-up or permanent or mobile, who would fund them, how they would be managed, and so on, okay? What each proposal would need to consider, which is quite an intricate diagram, all the sort of everything. And it was all very much studied in detail to then see how to provide these elements within. I looked at Waltham Forest because it's where I lived. All the sort of hostile Walthamstow elements we would find within the landscape, the area of intervention, what was already there to support homelessness, and how we could insert, well, this is the location of all the support for the homeless, and how we would insert some of these, okay? How we could provide additional shelter. The YMCA actually has some pods that are super cool, actually, that you can rent for a very, very small fee, and they help you until you get back onto your feet. And so I was trying to provide additional shelter with the same sort of mindset and model, or access to food trucks and public fridges, and so on, okay? And there was a lot of sort of looking at how to integrate these elements within the public space. Some which were temporary, some were permanent, Some would help train, some would help provide showering and so on, okay? So it's quite a long presentation, so I'm not gonna go through all of it, but just so you can get a bit of an idea of where I was headed, okay? That's the first one I wanna mention because I actually did it as a student. And then it's a topic I've kept on developing and looking into, okay? Of course, nowadays, the example that is leading in Europe is only, what is it called? Housing first, which actually shifts the mindset and says we need to provide a house and then work out training, health, drug addiction problems or other, okay? So first provide the housing, then sort out the problems, not sort out the problems and as a gift, as a present, as a, oh, you've done well, you've solved the problems, we're going to give you a house. That's a mindset at the moment. And that's changing thanks to northern countries and initiatives in Europe, in northern parts of Europe that they want to implement across all of the European Union. Okay, they've understood that providing house will help sort everything else out. Okay, so that's one view. The second project I'd like to talk to you about is this car park space. I don't know if you can see it. Well, this is a presentation we have for it. This is in a neighborhood called Chueca in Madrid, okay? Now it's a very gentrified, very hip, very much loved, very integrated. It's very central. But originally it was a neighborhood that had a lot of social problems to some extent. It had a lot of drug consumption. Okay, it was very strongly related to the 90s movida madrileña. So it was a very fun, and it's still a very fun neighborhood, a very liberal. It's actually considered the sort of LGBTQ plus neighborhood in Madrid. It's very inclusive, very accessible, but at the time it was a bit rougher. It had a lot of drug addiction and heroin consumption problems. Okay, if you go now there, you won't see all of what I'm saying because it's no longer there. Okay, but when we did this car parking, we did it many years ago. It was the case, and we won the public competition to create a car parking that was inclusive, accessible for the local community, and that became a bit of a part of the local culture of the neighborhood. Okay, so the whole parking, so you can see sorry, that's someone's phone. You can see the HIV lace, okay, the sculptural HIV lace. That's what we see at the entrance of the car park, the red sign, and that's become a iconic element, a monument for the local community and for the neighborhood and for Madrid. Okay, we didn't want to hide anything. We want people to learn and to appreciate and to recognize a problem, okay, and to feel supported, feel like there's nothing wrong. We want to break the barriers of taboos and of things not being able to be talked about or being hidden, or no, we wanted to make things visible, okay? So we created this cultural element, which actually recently there was an intent to redo the public square, and they were talking about taking it down. And the local community, the newspaper, and all of the city of Madrid got so fired up about it that, of course, there's no way they're going to take it down, because the local community really feels like it's part of our identity in Madrid, okay? The whole concept of the car park, as sort of naive it may sound, it had to do with love, okay? Love at all scales, of all sorts, and with inclusion, okay? So it's one of the first car parkings that has unisex bathrooms or genderless bathrooms, but it's not a recent project, so it's something that we are very proud of, okay? Well, these are more pictures of the entrance that you can see. It was inspired in literature, in Italian literature, about an entire poem that has to do a lot with love. This is, you can see the sculptural element. And I'll take you inside the car parking, okay? So all of the graphic design of the car parking was done with the sort of the symbols of gender and gender, to create a gender-free and gender comfortable and gender inclusive society. All the sort of roads are black, the main colors are black and red, okay? And this is the result, okay? This is what it looks like today, okay? It tells you where the exit is. All the wayfinding strategy is thought in that sense. It's all like a black box with red colors, and the walls are all covered in artwork. artwork that is trying to represent love at all scales. Okay, so we worked with the local community to put photos of different couples, different genders, different ethnicities, and make it as inclusive as possible. The pillars and the wallings and the bathrooms and the staircase, we could see it here, are cladded with this metal material, also because there's a lot of, in car park design, of course, the cars can bang into it. So it's also for maintenance, to make it really easy to wash and not make it a complicated thing, okay? Or if it's damaged, it's a protective element, okay? Here you can see other elements, okay? Not only gender inclusivity, but also different types of people, different issues, different moments, whether you have a baby or you've broken your leg because you hurt yourself, or all sorts of different inclusivities, okay? These are the bathrooms with the same material that I was mentioning. Really, we are very proud of these bathrooms because it's quite an old project. And also we decided to create this because there's this, we never feel comfortable in car parkings. We always feel a bit threatened. They're always dark, or at least that's how it used to be. There was also, people would use these bathrooms in these type of spaces to do drugs. So that's why they don't have a roof and there's space at the bottom, because if there was an emergency, the idea is that you could access them. So you could lock yourself, but actually it's fairly accessible between both. Or if somebody felt in danger, they could shout, okay? So it has all these issues. It's trying to address a lot of problems through the design of a car park, okay? Not through the design of an entire square or super public space, but of a public car parking, okay? Mm-hmm. And the last project I wanted to talk to you about was something which is a little bit more graphic. This is these images you see, I'm going to leave this one, is an installation we did as an initiative to support the emerging designers, a community of emerging designers in Madrid. So they were doing their first solo exhibition. They managed to secure a really far away from the city space, an industrial shed that was really far away, because it was, of course, not a budget. And we gave them this project as a present, and we signed it with our practice so that they could attract users. So it was a bit like, and consumers, so they could attract people to go and see the show. So to use as a bit like a marketing tool. And so we created this, this is a parking space as well. Actually, we created all of this paint entrance, and it became the entrance to emerging young talents and designers. Okay, and super last, and then that's it. Christmas lighting. This is a project we did for the city of Madrid last year. It was a gift to cheer up the city after the pandemic, in a way, during Christmas time. And so the idea was to create an urban forest through light and color that has different depths and different designs and different colors. And the closer you get to it, the bigger the trees become. We used the Christmas tree because it felt like the more universal sign of Christmas, without getting into the too religious element or too cultural element, just something that's a symbol that we remember. We always want to also send a message to, how important nature is for the city, and so bring that component into it. Okay, here you can see some other pictures. And the Christmas tree in Madrid, we have a tradition that we have about 20 Christmas trees across the city at Christmas. This is the one we created. It's a bit cheesy because it's full of hearts, but we wanted it to be cheesy. We wanted it to be a message of love and hope for everyone in Madrid, and for everyone that came to visit Madrid after such a difficult moment for our entire planet. And this is what we thought we could do to help. It's not solving a problem, but it was a message of hope and positivity and energy. So I think on that note, I'm going to conclude the presentation slides, but you can get a glimpse of the variety of things that we've done at very different scales.
Thank you, Francesca. So the whole idea is that what I've heard from Safir and Francesca is that it's the degree of involvement, right? I think design justice is really about getting people involved and bringing them positive impact. And then this impact can be both either emotional or rational. But I think the essence of this is how do we make people feel human again? Because I think we live in an era where everyone feels like a machine, or we live like the Matrix. That it feels very unreal after a while.
I think we need to, for me, the key point of all of this that I've said and everything we've heard is we need to be better listeners. And a bit also what Stav was saying, what everybody was saying here, we need to be better listeners. And I mean, art can be for the sake of everything, but architecture, design, urban planning, it's for people. So design needs to be added value, whether it's a bit of happiness or whether it's transforming completely a housing project into social housing. It's about listening to people and making sure that it's added value for the people we're designing for. Yeah.
Thank you, Francesca. Would you like to point the next person out? This is fun.
I don't like pointing at people.
Would you like to invite?
Okay, Jérôme.
Okay.
I was thinking I shouldn't smile too hard because that was the mistake that you made last time.
But you were smiling. You're a very smiley person. Can't be hidden.
How do I view this in full screen?
Take your time.
There we go. Thank you.
I'll make you co-host just in case.
There we go. This should work.
Okay.
Is that coming through? Is that coming through?
Yes.
Super.
Full screen now.
So the project that I'm going to talk about a little bit is at a different scale altogether. It's actually a class that was taught last year at MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning. I was getting a little bit in the direction earlier on about teaching and learning as being at the heart of design justice as a process. How do we develop the competency to open ourselves to the experiences, to open ourselves to the realities of the world around us, so that we can expose those narratives, those power imbalances, that we can expose the ways in which we are dehumanizing certain communities of people through our design practice, or specifically through our planning practice. And my thinking has been very interdisciplinary lately. Right now, I'm currently a student, and I'm this semester taking 4 classes across 4 different graduate schools at Harvard: the Education School, the Divinity School, the Policy School, etc. And so I in sharing this project, also want to bring that spirit of interdisciplinarity, which is really at the heart of what I think of design. I will say, please don't try to read all of the text on these slides, because these are spreads excerpted from a book that we produced as a sort of reflection on and an outcome of this class. So for context, last summer in the United States, racial violence against people of color was really on full display. First, because COVID-19 was overwhelmingly affecting communities of color. And then second, because of the recurring cycle of police violence against Black people, against Black bodies, that was on the news, and that prompted a mass uprising of people into the streets. And for some within the DUSP community, this was sickeningly familiar, and for others, it was eye-opening, and it was overwhelming. And the chair of the department asked the question, and I appreciate the humility that was behind the spirit of the question, was, what do we need to do as a department? I know that we need to do something. We need to respond in some way as a department, and I don't know how. And a group of mostly women of color faculty, just the most extraordinary women, came together and began to develop what ultimately turned into this 5-week class. At the same time, Black students in DUSP wrote the Black DUSP thesis, which was a very thorough critique and list of demands and recommendations for making changes to the urban planning program, and more broadly to the department. I want to make really clear that what I'm presenting is not my work. I was lucky to be a part of this extraordinary team. And especially Dana Cunningham and Delia Wendell were the lead professors and kind of ideologues behind this curriculum. And as I guess by way of introduction to what it is, what it asked was, well, how do urban planners come to understand the specific histories? How do urban planners come to understand the ways in which planning in the past has been a tool that has created a lot of harm? And then how does that open a paradigm shift in our understanding of what it is that planners are called to do today? What it means for planners to really center an understanding of that history and to center the communities and the people that have been most marginalized or disenfranchised in their work today, which Saf and Francesca, you both pointed to in your work. And then lastly, what are the personal skills that students need to attend to in order to be able to do this? So I won't move through the way that this was taught in chronological order, but I'm going to start with a session which was taught by Carolyn Crockett, who is an assistant professor of planning at MIT's Department of Planning, and who last summer, in the midst of these uprisings, was appointed as the chief of equity to the mayor of Boston. And it was the first time that that position existed at the level of the mayor's cabinet. Carolyn had written a book, People Before Highways, and her focus, her research focus has really been on the history of Boston's anti-highway movement. So for a little bit of context, in the 1950s, Boston's urban planning department had an enormous amount of power and made the decision under the name of urban renewal to destroy a neighborhood called the West End, which essentially amounted to a third of the old city, which was raised, it was mostly immigrant communities. And that neighborhood was destroyed to build housing, to build highways, to build this vision of modernity. Today, that neighborhood is institutions and luxury high rises. So what had been one of the most vibrant neighborhoods in Boston was destroyed to make way for that. And so in the 1960s, residents of Boston, community groups, grassroots organizations had learned from that experience. And when they learned that the city of Boston was now thinking about driving a series of highways through the center of the city, they were able to organize, they were able to bring together mass protests, they were able to demand hearings with the city, and ultimately they were successful in challenging a lot of these plans. And so the city of Boston today has far fewer highways, and the city center is not cut through. Neighborhoods were not sliced through, were not destroyed by this plan as they might otherwise have been. And the bigger idea here, I think, is of a reframing of urban planning as being what happens in a planning institution, or what happens within a planning and design agency hired by institutions that have the power to initiate these programs. But planning also being what happens at the grassroots, planning also being the work that community organizations are doing every day to shape the narrative of the city, to provide services to local, to people in neighborhoods that have been disenfranchised. And taking that a step further, then for us to ask as prospective planners, how it is that we understood the role that we wanted to be playing, how it is that planners understood their sense of the discipline. And I want to share a quote, because really this here is about connecting the past to the present, this frame of transitional justice, which is the bottom left here. Transitional justice teaches us that reckoning with the past, listening intently with purpose to a more full range of histories of human survival, suffering, and activism, is critical to becoming more aware of where we are in this present moment and what we really can do in the future. So planners, I'm thinking planners in the United States have a responsibility to understand this history of urban renewal, this history of modernist planning that destroyed a lot of, especially neighborhoods of color, especially neighborhoods that were poor, that had a lot of immigrants, neighborhoods that had already been systematically disenfranchised by the government. Planners have a responsibility to understand redlining and the way in which federal policy made it impossible for African-American families to invest in real estate starting in the 1930s and 1940s. Understanding that history is at the heart of then being able to develop planning interventions that address that history and that lead us to a different future. And it's also at the heart of being able to listen to the people who have been subject to this repeated disenfranchisement. I want to move into two tools that were shared as basically ways of beginning to reckon with the injustices of the past as processes for transitional justice. One of those is the idea of truth commissions, and we look specifically at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa that was brought together to hear the crimes of apartheid. And tying that specific example back to planning, there was not a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for planning, but we looked at the example of the neighborhood of Sophiatown, a suburb of Johannesburg that had become a symbol of Black culture, and that was raised, evicted, and destroyed by the government in the 1950s. So this question we were posing, so truth commissions are a body that convenes to reveal and to recognize past wrongdoing. Their aim isn't to focus on the guilt of perpetrators, but on hearing individuals tell the hard truths about their systematic oppression and violation. And it's to bring into focus what the stakes are for society when we don't listen to those stories. It's to bring into focus the way in which we are able to continue to live if we don't understand this harm and this violence that has been and that continues to be committed. And so in a sense, this process of truth-telling really is what planners are doing and need to be doing when they're working with communities. Of course, it's fundamental with this acknowledgement and affirmation to then ask what action or restitution will follow. How does power actually change? So the next tool that we looked at was reparations. And we read a piece together by Nicole Hannah-Jones from the New York Times, who wrote the 1619 Project about reframing our understanding of the impact of slavery on the United States today. And in the US, slavery, the history of Jim Crow laws, geographic segregation in cities to this day, differences in access to loans, I mentioned redlining, access to education, all of that and more leads to the ongoing racial difference that exists in the United States today in monetary terms. The racial wealth gap is such that a typical white family has something like 8 times the wealth of a Black family. And that's not even to, that's just to focus on a monetary conception of reparations without thinking of the history of indignity and harm. So how does a country begin to account for that? And I want to quote Dana, a professor. How can listening to the African-American experience help us to understand the ways in which the US economy, culture, and political institutions were designed to perpetrate racialized extraction and injustice? And how can that experience help us as planners to discern moral claims for justice and to orient ourselves towards changing unjust structures? So the question from a planning perspective becomes, if our cities historically have been segregated, impoverished, exploited, if they've destroyed African-American neighborhoods, what does a planning process look like which does the opposite of this, which restores, which accounts for everything that was taken away? And students went through a series of workshops first to design what a truth commission might look like for urban planning of the era of apartheid in South Africa. And then later on to construct a demand for reparations to a jurisdiction. And as I say that, I'm thinking there actually is a city in the United States, I think a suburb of Chicago, that has begun to explore reparations. And the way that they're framing it is specifically to invest money into I think a pool of funds for housing, specifically for Black families. But there is a growing conversation around what does this look like in practice, in action in the United States. I want to go a step deeper into this question of the relationship to history and differentiate between history as what we understand as a set of facts, and then memory as having emotion, as having personal feeling, having affect. And the course dug into collective memory. Collective memory is how a group of people together remember the past. And that ties back to what I was saying earlier on about the architecture of Paris and the stories that tells us of the dignity and power of a culture. What I was saying about colonial architecture in India when I lived there and what that was telling us about that history. Counter memories are the unacknowledged histories. They're the memories that are told by marginalized sources. and they seek out a more inclusive narrative of the past. And there's a picture up here of this memorial that was built by the Equal Justice Initiative and designed by Mass Design Group. I was very lucky to work for Mass right at the time that the organization was opening a conversation with the Equal Justice Initiative around what does it look like? What does it look like to, EJI was doing work to collect the stories and the history of lynchings of African Americans in the American South. And we're beginning to ask, how do we bring this story into our popular consciousness? How do we learn to reckon with the fact that as a country, that is a part of our history? I think memorials are a really powerful example of how architecture can celebrate counter memories and change those narratives for us. I'm going to move to a section, and this was actually the first week of the course, which was on building muscle personally for doing this work. Listening to these histories can be very hard. Listening and keeping our attention and consistently returning to these histories when for people who have had the luxury and the privilege of looking away from those histories, who have not their entire lives been subject to the impacts that they have had. And so then the question becomes, what are the personal skills that allow us to open our hearts and our minds to this emotionally challenging work? I've got some core competencies here up on the screen. Some of those are about learning to work within a system. So systems thinking, seeking to understand how power operates, seeking to understand something like how structural racism has existed in the history of planning, seeking to understand what you were talking about, Francesca, around homelessness and the systems that create that, but also deep listening, having the capacity to stay focused on this difficulty and to hear, both within a room, paying attention to the dynamics and Saf, I'm thinking of the community engagement processes that you were showing us in your work. Listening to what community members are saying, but going deeper than that, listening to the subtext, listening to the experiences, listening to the perspectives that are underneath that. And then I think the personal levels of this work, learning to work with oneself. I like very much this idea of action confidence, of understanding the agency that each of us has as designers specifically, to stay within the hard work of understanding and reckoning with these histories and stories, and the agency that we have then to bring about change. And I like this last quote here: "This moment of crisis gives each of us an opportunity to view ourselves through new lenses and to decide who we want to be and who we can be." And specifically, there was an exercise here that students went through called personal theory of practice, developing their personal theory of practice, naming and reckoning with, what are my values? What is my history? What are the experiences that I've had that shape those values? And so who do I want to be? And what relationships do I need to cultivate in order to hold myself accountable to being the person, to being the planner, to being the designer that I want to be? This is real quick, a framework called Theory U, taught by the Presencing Institute, and it was a lot of the kind of core skills and bases for the interpersonal components of this course. And what this U says is, it asks, how do we let go of our old ways of seeing? How do we let go of our blockages, of our tendency to avoid? And how do we open our mind and our heart and our will in order to feel into, to sense into, to understand the bigger truths of this moment, of the communities that we're a part of, in order to ultimately develop our agency and our capacity to act. act on those truths. I'm really skimming over this, and I would encourage people who are interested to look up the Presencing Institute. The work that they do is really powerful, and there's an online MOOC, an online course that people can take that goes into this in a lot more detail. And then lastly, and I'm probably out of time, but lastly, in the 5th week, we, the course, turn back to the institution. What are the changes that DUSP needs to make? Answering the call that had been put out by the chair of the department. What do we need to do? Yes, so what are the things that DUSP needs to make to become an anti-racist institution, to prepare planners to go out into the world and to really challenge systems of injustice? And some of those are building long-lasting relationships and long-lasting commitments to organizations and partners on the ground as a part of studio organization. They're including resources like oral histories, music, videos, interviews. They're developing intentional space within the classroom to critique the syllabus, to critique the process that we're learning. Students often have really strong and powerful perspectives on whether what they're learning is going to the level of depth that is necessary to actually address injustice. And I say this having very much seen it in my coursework at the GSD. So how does an institution learn to seek out that feedback and to really ask itself, how do we change? How do we become more effective at challenging injustice rather than putting up a wall and feeling stuck, feeling defensive? And these are just some of the themes that were woven through the entire 5-week course. I think the ones of listening, the ones of pausing, resist immediate action and reaction, to listen deeply, to self-reflect, and to consider the methods and knowledge that are necessary for ethical and just practice are really important. And then, of course, the importance of history, of connecting the past to the present when looking to the future, and of acknowledging racism, of acknowledging how present structural injustice is in our everyday. I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you, Gerard, for sharing. I think the core takeaway from what I heard from you, it's really how do we develop that muscle or that mental capacity to deal with all these things that we choose to look away? Because it's so much easier to look away, but for you to face the reality, you need a lot of, in a way, courage. You need a lot of positivity. You need a lot of ecosystem to support you to do so. And that is wonderful. Thanks for sharing. Last but not least, I have Mina. We're slightly behind time, but we still have a bit, like maybe 10 minutes, Mina, or less or more, up to you. Mina, yeah, over to you to share about how you've been doing your work. Yeah.
I'll try to be as fast as possible. It might be a little more than 10 minutes,
Sure.
but let me try to just...
Bottom right, full screen.
I figured this out yesterday, and now
just go to the bottom right, maybe. It's a screen button there.
okay. Just a moment. Okay. All right. Are we good?
Yes,
You
we're
can
good.
see my screen? Okay, great. So today I will present 2 projects that tackle design justice across scales and disciplines. The first is in landscape architecture, and the latter will be in the realm of architecture. The project, this project, Adaptive Technostrata along the Bay of Bangkok, was developed in collaboration with my partner, Sam Gilbert, and my studio partner, Sam Gilbert, and it reflects an attempt to provide a practicable and technically informed strategy for the transition of a coastal landscape from one of precarious monoculture to an ecologically rich, economically viable, and culturally relevant set of conditions that can respond and adapt to the extreme effects of sea level rise due to climate change. The vast, flat, intertidal landscape of the northern coast of the Bay of Bangkok, just south of the city, has long been a site of cultivation, harvest, and strategic defense. Mangrove forests were once an abundant and invaluable source of charcoal, building materials, and hunting and fishing grounds. The daily ebb and flow of large tides dynamically transforms the landscape on an hourly basis and provides the conditions suitable for brackish water, aquaculture, and salt harvesting. Until the 1970s, aquaculture practices existed at a relatively small scale, responding to the natural rhythms of the tide, the monsoons, and the life cycle of local aquatic creatures. Beginning at this time and accelerating through the 80s, the mangrove forests were cleared to make way for industrial-scale shrimp farming, which exploits a single species of giant prawn, selling to a highly competitive global market. The antibiotics and nutrient-rich feed pellets used in these ponds drain off into the bay and accumulate in the soil, creating toxic conditions that harm surrounding ecosystems and inhibit sustainable use of the ponds themselves, which are often abandoned after an average of only 5 years. In addition to the external forces of sea level rise due to climate change, land subsidence escalated by unchecked groundwater extraction in and around Bangkok, and the inhibition of sediment transport due to upriver dams have combined to create a coastal erosion crisis that threatens the livelihoods of coastal residents and the security of the highly urbanized region just inland from the coastal plain. In order to ensure a long-term economic, ecological, and cultural future for this coastal region, we have proposed a series of technological approaches relating to what we have designated as 5 strategic zones that span from the edge of the Gulf to the southern periphery of the urban sprawl that emanates from the city of Bangkok, covering a transect of roughly 10 kilometers. Sorry, I'm just speeding through this, but you know, we can talk more about it in the Q&A afterwards if you have any questions. The Thai government and local communities have deployed a variety of erosion prevention structures in a piecemeal fashion. They range from bamboo fences to stone walls. Living infrastructure includes mangroves, whose roots tap sediment and create habitat essential for functioning ecosystems, and nipa palms, whose sugar-rich sap can be sustainably harvested for use as biofuels. Bamboo scaffolding is widely used in construction to create permanent and temporary structures. So the site that we are focusing on is connected by a network of canals that feed thousands of aquaculture ponds covering roughly 50,000 square meters. And urbanized settlement is limited to villages along the edges of the ponds, with some larger industrial sites and residential developments in the north. The 5 zones are defined by their proximity to the open water of the Gulf, as well as their relationship to the hydrological networks. So Zone 1 is offshore island generation. Zone 2 is defined by afforestation through applied nucleation. Zone 3 is phased mangrove afforestation. Zone 4 was aquaculture redistricting. And Zone 5 was nipaculture deployment. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm just going to focus on Zone 1 because we'll definitely run out of time if we go through all of them. So this zone is what we considered to be the first line of defense, and that defense strategy was twofold. One was pond berm reinforcement by planting mangroves along the coast, and the second was island formation through sediment capturing scaffolding crescents. So we studied the way mangrove roots disrupt the flow of water to allow sediment to drop out. And our innovation involves the same materials we saw on our visit to the coast, but by slicing the bamboo in half lengthwise, we aim to create a directional capture mechanism, which allows sediment to flow in with the waves, but not out with the tide. Analyzing the flow shadows created by an arching scaffold deployment pattern, we predicted the overlapping areas of sedimentation with incoming and outgoing currents, resulting in an organic island pattern. So this is the evolution of one of the scaffolding crescents, creating an island of sediment over time. And this is what the generation of all of the offshore islands look like together over the span of 50 years. So what you can see here, everything in black is basically reinforcing the coastline, which has eroded over time, bringing back soil and sediment, capturing it, catching it, and creating and reinforcing the coast. Over time, these deposition areas allow for mangrove rooting or even active plantation, which in turn create more deposition, creating a feedback loop of sedimentation. Eventually, the bamboo will decay, having played its part in allowing for the mangrove establishment. So this project has a lot of takeaways, but what I would like to highlight from this example is our attempt to take a step beyond the aesthetics of our site and incorporate local materials, technologies, and construction techniques into the design. Especially as students that were not native to the site, it was our priority to learn and utilize local techniques and histories and knowledge in a way that wasn't just aesthetic. So my next project is Hyper Real Estate, 501c3 Park. This was actually my architecture thesis, advised by Iman Fayyad. And I will start with a brief background to my thesis, which is about the skyscraper, the luxury skyscraper and the luxury apartment. So the rapid financialization of the skyscraper throughout the 20th century has turned the skyscraper into a machine itself, a generator of pure liquid commodity. 501c3 Park examines the modern skyscraper as a financial instrument and the resulting phenomena of real estate speculation and ghost housing. In New York, the cost of roughly 900 apartments, the ones that are highlighted here, throughout these 6 residential towers are worth more than 20,000 average American homes. Another example is in Vancouver, which has the highest housing prices in Canada while also having the lowest average income among Canadian cities. The city has become literally unaffordable for its own residents and thus increasingly vacant. Ghost housing has detrimental effects on neighborhoods, residents, and local communities and economies. Because retail prices are decided by the rental and property values of the neighborhoods that they serve, glaring incompatibilities arise in regards to the cost of living for people that actually have to live in these neighborhoods, a phenomenon Michael Sorkin describes as consumption spaces. The effect of vacancy on the domestic unit itself is similarly uncanny. Today, 1/2 of the luxury condos built in Manhattan in the last 5 years sit empty. In the case of vacant but owned luxury condos, the purpose of the unit is to function as pure liquid asset, rendering the unit itself mere artifact. An increasing number of units are sold as core and shells, which are essentially open, undesigned floor plans. Advertisements for these luxury units include large, unarticulated spaces with floating furniture and impeccable finishing. If it weren't for a randomly placed bathtub next to a column, there would be nothing in the design that would indicate the space is in fact a bathroom. 432 Park, Raffaele Vignoli's luxury skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan, boasts floor-to-ceiling marble bathrooms. However, anyone that has tried to walk on polished marble with wet feet would know that this bathroom is not meant to actually bathe in. Rather, it is meant to maximize value. Bathrooms and kitchens in apartments can be showcases for some of the finest materials in the game. The finishing cost of houses can only increase the cost of construction by about an average of 20%, but can increase the value of a unit by over 100%. Top of the line wood, stone, and glass paneling and tiling on floors, walls, and ceilings can increase the value of a condo exponentially. Since bathrooms and kitchens offer the greatest opportunities for luxury amenities and surface area for fine finishes, they're often overused in luxury condos. As seen here, again in 432 Park, almost half of the unit is bathroom spaces. So my thesis, as you will go on to see, makes use of these excess spaces to offer alternate possibilities. So in those spaces, I proposed a civic intervention into the luxury skyscraper, a library. The history of the library in cities as a leveler is equally as rich as that of the skyscraper. Today, the institution of the library is commonly seen as an active resource for a cross-section of city dwellers, open to everyone. The free public library flattens access and privilege and offers knowledge and belonging to anyone that seeks it. My project concedes that these apartments are designed to maximize wealth and not the quality of the space. How then can we repurpose some of this floor area to explore alternate potentialities of the luxury ghost condo? Well, I challenge the parasitical relationship between the luxury high-rise and the city and aim to turn that relationship into a symbiotic one, in which owners and city dwellers can find mutual gain. So 501c3 Park explores new potentials in luxury asset condominiums by tackling two phenomena simultaneously. The first being the vacancy rates, which we've established, of ultra-wealthy residential properties. And the second is the social capital offered by the philanthropic value of ultra-high net worth individuals. So I've chosen the 6 penthouses for 432 Park because they're the largest units and they are the most vacant most of the time. This is the biggest intervention in terms of square footage and also symbolically, not just in floor area, but by its heightened position in the building. This project explores hybrid forms of habitancy, resulting in residential properties with civic functions that offer 501c3 philanthropic tax exemptions for the ultra wealthy. By turning the shell companies that own these units into private charitable foundations, the city regains some valuable civic spaces in areas that need them most, while the owners benefit from what they care about the most, tax exempt estates and valuable philanthropic status and donor recognition. So this creates a stack of programs that would typically be used as community connective tissue in cities. The site surrounding 432 Park is designed for tourists and visitors, a toy town with a series of amenities that don't actually serve the local community. The few libraries that are available here are usually sole purpose, like vocational training and workforce development. The new program I introduce will fill the gaps in community resources by plugging into existing network of New York public libraries. By clearing out existing program and concentrating public uses, my thesis facilitates the delicate breach of community into an infrastructure that was never intended to support it, while simultaneously building social capital for its donors. The typical 432 Park penthouse is up to 8,000 square feet. My proposal offers 2/3 of that floor plan to the New York Public Library as a tenant, while leaving 2,400 square feet for a 2-bed, 2-bath, ultra luxury apartment. So the average 2-bedroom apartment in the neighborhood is approximately 1,000 square feet, and this, even having removed 2/3 of that, is still over twice that. The floor plate of the library spins up the penthouses to create variability of views for both the owner and the public. Varied program orientation allows for equal view distribution. Just like its penthouse bathrooms, 432 Park's ground plane focuses on luxury materials and not its quality or spatial organization, resulting in a cold, uninviting space. The privately owned public space you can see in the background is similarly austere and underused. As 432 Park takes its cues from the square, I use the circle as a form to integrate and extend the ground plane into the sidewalk. The library entrance chips off the square and reclaims space for the city. To push back against the poor door pitfalls that are often created by such programs, the plaza is centralized and has equal visual space and a heightened sense of wonder, while the entrance to the library is partitioned for public-private use, and does not establish a hierarchy. I reintroduced the building to the city through the public realm to offer an alternative to consumption space, with a sculpture garden to offer a sense of arrival, and extending a hand out to the cross-section of passers-by to welcome them in. Upon entry, the elevator takes you directly to the 91st floor, where the user will be welcomed by a double-height space surrounded by stacks and private reading rooms. Double-height spaces are used throughout the building to create a sense of arrival, gathering, and wonder by reclaiming views that belong to the public while breathing air into the previously sterile interior. This library moves beyond just sharing infrastructure as mode of distributing shelter and information, but also as a means for delight. The second floor is a reading space designed for quiet introspection in secluded reading cubbies. The third floor is a daycare space that can be used explicitly for childcare or as a drop-off where parents or caretakers can drop off their children while they use their other library programs. The double height space here provides for views of the floor above, making the space feel more familiar for children by creating a visual connection to their caretakers. The elements of play are informed by what Quentin Stevens calls loose space, whereby children can build their own narratives and choose the different potentialities offered by abstracted forms. The fourth floor is a co-working space that offers a variety of working typologies across scale and formality, including medium and large meeting rooms with gradients from fully private to semi-private and formal and casual formal gathering to casual discussion. By integrating childcare and co-working, this library destigmatizes the integration of productive and reproductive labor, creating new opportunities for women and caregivers to participate in the workforce. The art world is a parallel to ultra-luxury housing, where wealth and opportunity are consolidated. The remaining 2 floors integrate space for creative professionals to work, rehearse, and exhibit their art, thus giving emerging New York artists an opportunity in prime real estate to foster their creative potential. This project explodes the concept of the high-rise condo by dissecting its kit of parts and offering new imaginaries for public uses. Throughout the building, the public and private can coexist without disturbing each other. Not that there's anyone to disturb here, but the residential potential and luxury value of the penthouse is unencumbered while creating a vivid and lively public realm 1,500 feet above the New York City streets. The new relationship I'm trying to achieve between the public and private rooms parallel a change relationship between the building and the city by creating breaches between asset urbanism and civic space. So the main takeaways from this project is that architecture is more than just making cool buildings, or in this case, the tallest residential building in New York. I wanted to highlight the detrimental effects that architecture can have on a community, but also the way design can be deployed to give back to the space from which it takes. So that's all. Sorry, Brandon. Oh.
No problem. We're slightly behind schedule, but I think we have very insightful perspectives from all 4 of you talking about really it's justice in different scale and design. So I think the core of this, before we let everyone go, thank you everyone for your time. What do we want to do? Who are we? And also what are the competencies required for us to succeed? Right? I mean, at first you didn't make it, you try harder, you try again. And I think the whole idea with social justice and design justice, why do we bring this topic up is because, I mean, of course, it's Safir's suggestion, which is a great suggestion, but on top of that, it's also, a lot of people don't realize what we can start doing. You know, it's not one day we wake up and then we can design amazing projects to help the world gain balance. It's over time we accumulate perspectives and skill sets and experiences and networks and resources so that we can one day deliver design and justice. So moving forward, I hope everyone here can go home. I mean, for you 4 of you, you have to carry on with your day, but for this side of the world, we are going to go to bed. So, but prior to go to bed, it's really how do we prepare ourselves mentally? How do we be better listeners? And how important it is for us to acknowledge that, like what you guys mentioned, spaces can be detrimental, but spaces can also be giving positive charge to a community and to society and to people who are always interacting with that space. So with that, I would like to end today's sharing session. Thank you, Francesca, Safir, Gerard, and Mina for your time. And I will send this, Chanwai, our doodle artist, will send you the completed artwork later on. And I will share this with all our 1,000 university partners of AYDA Awards for them to just understand what is design justice. And if they're interested to ask you more questions, I will definitely haunt you. And yes, so keep in touch. Thank you, everyone, and have a very good evening ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
So
over to the tech team to play.